you cannot start a business without making mistakes. Choose your lane and become really, really good at it. Cut your losses earlier if you are able to, because it will help you grow. Social media and marketing, for me, 10 years down the line, is a completely dark magic.
This is the Education Business Podcast for all founders and business owners in the education sector. This podcast is for you if you have an education business or you're thinking about starting one. That could be tutoring, publishing, holiday clubs. It really doesn't matter. You're in business and you're also in education. But most of all, you're focused on improving outcomes for children in the way you know best, through your business. I'm Claire Riley, co-founder of educational resources website Classroom Secrets, and I'll be sharing how to make your education business bigger, better, and have more impact through my own experiences and also the conversations I have with other founders and business owners in education. The Education Business Podcast is sponsored by Classroom Secrets, helping you to support your children's learning. Matthew, welcome to the Education Business Podcast. Let's talk education and business. What has your career looked like? How did you get into founding Tutor Onboarder? What were the things that happened along the way? What were the forks in the road? What were the important bits that we need to know about that led you on this journey to starting this company?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Claire. It's super exciting to be here on the Education Business Podcast. So, to your question, the career that I've had up to date has been a higgledy-piggledy line and full of winding roads and twisting turns. I started off as a marine biologist. That was my first career. And I then transitioned out of that and I trained at King's College London to become a teacher. Now, my first teaching post was in a school that was in special measures. Now, trainee teachers aren't allowed to train in schools that are in special measures. I managed to fall through the gaps, but it was probably one of the best things that could ever happen to me because the head teacher under whom I served was a chap called Alex Russell, and he's since received an OBE for his services to education. And it was a really fantastic training ground for me for many, many years as I grew. And throughout that time, I became what's known as an SLE, which is a specialist leader in education. These names change all the time. It used to be an AST, etc., etc. And so I started doing consultancy in schools, basically because I was a science teacher, my job there was to go into the science departments of a variety of schools, either before Ofsted or post Ofsted, on a number of occasions, even during Ofsted, to improve the teaching and learning of the science departments and overall outcomes for the students. So that was the whole kind of teaching side of things. And as I sort of grew in my consultancy work, I wanted to sort of leverage a greater earning potential. I'm not going to lie. We all want to make sure that we can pay off our mortgages and whatnot. So I decided to start tutoring on the side of that. And eventually, thus was born my first company, which is Capital Tuition Group, which is now 10 years old. We just had our 10th birthday in September 2025. So fast forward a few years and the pandemic shook the world and swift turned upside down. And when the National Tutoring Programme came about, that was sort of announced by the government as catch-up funding, but also to assist schools and students on missed education throughout the lockdowns, I saw a real opportunity. And so I spent a lot of time, money, effort, energy, along with my team at Capital Tuition Group to make sure that we would become an approved tuition provider and a tuition partner with them. And that process was a very, very rigorous one indeed. And it's from here that the seed was planted, I suppose, to create Tutor Onboarder. So we had to be audited all the time. And as part of the approval, one of the sections of auditing was safer recruitment. Now, because I'd been a teacher for quite a number of years, I thought that that part of my business at Capital Tuition Group was pretty damn well organised and thorough. And the Department for Education, when they were approving us, had a different opinion, let's put it that way. And it was a real education, I tell you, and I had to really pull up my socks and improve my systems. And there were just so many things that I didn't know, and I didn't know that I didn't know them either, which made me doubly blind. But to all intents and purposes, they required us to have an extraordinarily high level of compliance, which I fully endorse and think is totally and utterly appropriate. And it led me to think that actually our systems, if we were struggling with this system, and we were, and in order to make sure that all of our tutors reached a certain level of compliance, which at the time they didn't, but then once we put all of our systems in, they did, but the amount of administrative friction that it caused was not economically viable or time viable either. I thought we need a system. And I said to my director of operations at the time, a fabulous lady called Noor, I said, Noor, go and find me a platform that onboards tutors in the way that we need them. She went away. 3 weeks later, she came back after having literally scoured the internet from top to toe. She came back to me and said, Matthew, there's nothing that we can use that is appropriate for what we need. So I said, right, Noor, you have to go and build me one. And she built the first prototype, I suppose, that we used internally of Tutor Onboarder. And thus was born the very first version of Tutor Onboarder. I suppose the next thing to say is that I then went into discussion with John Nichols, who's the president of the Tutors Association. And I said to John, I was like, I've got this idea. Do you think it's a good idea? And we'd already started development by that stage. And he resoundingly supported it and gave me a few pointers and tips, and we discussed it in the market niche. And I ran a bunch of focus groups and questionnaires in and amongst the tutoring sector. And it became very clear that lots of tutoring organizations would really benefit from this, particularly with the advent of increased SEND, tutoring requirements, work with councils, work with schools who quite rightly have high stipulations of safer recruitment. So the timing was really quite amazing. And not least in 2024, there was a big breakout over the news of not very pleasant stories about the tutoring sector being unsafe and a bit of the wild, wild west. And it was kind of all over the media, really. So the timing was kind of amazing. And we'd already started creating Tutor Onboarder. And here we are now with a really slick system that is getting better every day. And we're really grateful that our users are sort of feeding back to us and helping us be better as well. And there were a lot of forks in the road, Claire, and there's some of them.
What an amazing story. And you tell it so well as well. That was fantastic and gives us a real picture of your journey. So, right now, you've obviously got two companies. Are they very interlinked? So, is it the same people working on the different companies, or are they separated? How does it work?
Thank you so much for that very complimentary response. I'm glad it was interesting. I suppose the best way to answer, the question as to whether they are interlinked, it would be safe to say that Tutor Onboarder was born out of Capital Tuition Group and a very specific need that we were dealing with. And I was very fortunate enough to have Noor, who was my director of operations at Capital Tuition Group, to be part of the architectural solution to a real problem that we had, which was being able to onboard loads of tutors quickly, smoothly, efficiently, as well as reaching a really high level of safer recruitment compliance, which is obviously was arbitrated and necessary for our approval as a National Tutoring Programme partner with Capital Tuition Group. So out of that, we were like, oh, we really got a real problem here. So I then created Tutor Onboarder. It's a new entity. It's newly registered, so to speak. And so it's headed up by obviously me and Noor, who continues to be my director of operations, but on that side, on that business there. And of course, we've got an operations executive under her, who also leads our concierge team, and we've got our team of developers. And we're really excited to just newly welcome another fabulous sort of director of operations as well. And her name is Camilla, and she is already making waves, which is just awesome. So it's a separate entity. And then, of course, on the Capital Tuition Group side, when Noor moved across, we were really fortunate enough to have Emily. Emily has now become the general manager. She navigates the Capital Tuition Group absolutely brilliantly with the help of our admin and marketing lead, who's called Antonia. We've also got our director of operations on that side of the business now, a fantastic lady called Monique. So two very separate entities. Are they linked at all? Only in as far as Capital Tuition Group does use Tutor Onboarder, but to all extents and purposes, they're two separate limited companies. Keeps me busy.
I can imagine it does. I think lots of entrepreneurs, they start the first business and then Some people want a lifestyle business. Some people really want to build and they get the bug and they want to buy companies or they want to build other companies. So I think this would be a really great question to ask because it's not every day we have somebody on the podcast who has more than one company that they've founded. How do you manage your time then between the two companies? What do you see as your role overarching both entities? And just to add to that as well, if you did have the two companies working together, what would you see the downsides of that as the whole team working on the two companies together?
They are actually really interesting questions because I suppose it would be important for me to outline that Tutor Onboarder has been born out of Capital Tuition Group, and Capital Tuition Group is definitely fueling in all sorts of capacities Tutor Onboarder, right? So it's not only funding it in large part, a lot of the resources that are available at Capital Tuition Group are resources that are also needed for another company like Tutor Onboarder. So my personnel have also come in part from Capital Tuition Group. And in fact, Noor, who was my director of operations at Capital Tuition Group, has now moved over onto being sort of number two of Tutor Onboarder. I use my marketing team from Capital Tuition Group to do the marketing at Tutor Onboarder. So it's one of the things that is really interesting is that I am able to leverage, I suppose, economy of scale, but I also notice when I look at my team how frazzled they are sometimes, and lines do get blurred. And so slowly but surely, I am moving the two teams apart. And, they're going to be able to stand on Tutor Onboarder is slowly more and more able to stand on its own 2 feet. In terms of my role, it's a really curious question because I'm actually becoming more and more hopeless at doing some of the day-to-day stuff that I used to do all the time at Capital Tuition Group. So I don't even know how some of our systems work anymore. And I think that's really telling because I spend most of my time talking to clients or going to meetings or, being on wonderful podcasts like this one or running other episodes on different podcasts. It's really morphed. Like my role has really, really morphed into not working in the business and much more working on the business. And I suppose when it comes to my team, the thing that I really enjoy being able to do is having a bird's eye view, which when you're in it so much, you don't necessarily have the privilege of being able to see it in that perspective. And other than sort of having that bird's eye view and having a really directional vision, which you can then sort of impart to your team, it's how do you enable your team to flourish and work as best as they possibly can? Because when there are things that are going wrong, that's probably or possibly a systemic challenge that you have within the company. So you've got to be really clear about what yeses you say yes to, what no's you say no to, and just really drive and forge ahead. But I think what's interesting about what you were mentioning in terms of people getting the bug, when I started Capital Tuition Group, I promise you, the thing that I was just wanting to do, I once remember saying this to my dad. I said, wouldn't it be great if Capital Tuition Group could just earn me an extra £1,000 on top of the tuition that I'm doing myself? And that was, that was a big dream and it was a lifestyle business. I remember the point at which Capital Tuition Group grew beyond me. And it was a really nervous turning point. It was a real inflection point of like, I actually can't run Capital Tuition Group on my own anymore. The systems are too big. The client inquiries is too big. It's become beyond me. And that was really, really interesting. And it's already the same at Tutor Onboarder. There's so much that I can't do. And so I suppose going back to some of the questions that you had is that if you surround yourself with people who are better at the stuff that needs to get done than you are, then you're sort of winning. I suppose that's the way to go. I hope that makes sense.
Do you teach children as part of your business offering? Have you considered using resources from Classroom Secrets? At Classroom Secrets, we're always adding new resources for a range of subjects, and we're keen to hear your suggestions for resources too. We know that you didn't go into business to work more hours than you did in the classroom. You went into business to give you freedom. Let us help with that. Visit classroomsecrets.co.uk to sign up. Oh, I can relate to this. I was saying to a founder the other day, one thing you don't think about as you grow as an entrepreneur is that you change. What you're good at changes. And when you're good at doing everything in the beginning, you kind of end up leaning into those things that you are good at, which is like doing the podcasts and all the different kind of stuff you mentioned. And that can be hard then, especially if you are starting another business, because it's a lot harder to flip to be the other type of entrepreneur. It's like there are different types of entrepreneur and you can change as you go through the journey. And I've definitely felt that for myself. I think that's maybe why sometimes people go on to buy businesses after they've started their own business rather than start them up again, although obviously you have. So if you think back to the biggest mistakes that you have faced while scaling your businesses, what were they and what would you do differently for any founders listening that might be able to get insights from that?
It's a really interesting question, but just going back just a step, I'd love to know for you, obviously you've scaled your business, etc. What is it that you are finding that you're leaning into the most? Where do you think that your skills are lying the most? For me, I just had an experience the other day where a client called through. They wanted to sign up to one of our tuition classes. And for the life of me, I couldn't get them logged on. I just thought, Matthew, how is it that you can't do stuff in your own company? And I went back to the team and I was like, guys, I'm really sorry. I couldn't get them booked on because the course was closed. And they were just like, yeah, all you need to do is this. I was like, is that it? But I don't know anymore because that's not what I'm dealing with on the day to day. And it's kind of scary, because you think, gosh, if I can't do that, and if, my team disappears or whatever, then really I can't do anything. But with one person who I like to listen to, and his name is Daniel Priestley, and he has a little podcast where I've watched him say, like, I can't do anything. I mean, I literally can't do anything. I can write some things, but the rest of it I can't do. And so I suppose I have to, although it's not particularly reassuring, there is a sense of, right, well, you just have to surround yourself with people who are just much better than you at the things that you need to get done. Oh, golly, what's the biggest mistake? I've made so many. But I think that actually you cannot start a business without making mistakes. There's just a litany of disasters. And often when I speak to other founders and other entrepreneurs, they just go, yeah, that was an absolute car crash. That was total chaos and carnage. But there are some fundamentals that I've learnt now that I'm sort of 10 years into the game of being a founder. And there are two that strike me. One is pick a lane and really get that lane down pat. I think one of the tendencies that entrepreneurs have and founders have is that when they're wanting to get more revenue or they need more revenue or they're trying to like ideate and create and evolve and all the rest of it, they can start just a brand new product line. I'm learning this again and again. This is not something I've learned once and it's in the pocket. Do you know what I mean? It's every single time I come back to this and I go, oh, Matthew, just stick to the thing that you're really good at. So I'll give you an example. When the pandemic hit, loads of tutoring companies lost their client base because once you cancel national exams, you sort of cancel the need for some tutoring. And it was a bit slow to pick up. And I think a lot of people did pivot and did the obvious next thing, just like I did, which was start to do a small group online tuition. Now, we are now 5 years down the line of doing a small group online tuition, but there is a hell of a lot of infrastructure, a hell of a lot of tech, a hell of a lot of organization and logistics that goes around making sure that that flows smoothly, particularly when you're also doing that directly into schools or with local authority contracts or alternative provisions, PRUs or whatever. There's how do you do with the reporting? How do you do the attendance tracking? How do you train your tutors? How do you monitor quality? There's so much around it. It's not like, oh, bang, I've got a great idea. We're going to do group tuition now and I'm going to make loads and loads of money. And we are still, to this day, trying to get bookings correct, trying to streamline and automate things that are clunky or where we encounter lots of friction. And I'm staying on this course because it's worth staying on this course, on the trajectory of getting this group stuff right. But of course, what did I also do? Because I'm a founder and I like shiny things, and I think a lot of founders are the same, I went on the China trade mission with a TTA back in September or October 2024. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to now internationalize. And of course, I came back from that all buzzed and buoyed, and I'd got a few contacts, and I started to launch, my endeavors there. And of course, it fizzled out because I didn't manage to unhook a couple of contracts or whatever it might be. But it was also just another business line. It's another business altogether where I didn't have any of the resources or the infrastructure to really push that. That's not where my business was geared to. And so I had a great time and I wouldn't change it for the world. But my point here is it was a really refreshing relearning of an event where it's like, no, Matthew, stick to what you're doing and really pour your energies into there. Because as you scale, you'll realize that you have a certain finite amount of resources, whether that be time, human people power, tech infrastructure, etc. And it can only deal with what it can deal with. And so you have to start selecting where your resources go quite carefully. So that's one example, is like choose your lane and become really, really good at it. I think one of the expressions I've heard is cover a breadth of product lines that's an inch wide, but a mile deep. Like do that thing and do it really, really, really well until you can expand on to other product lines. So that's the first mistake, or it's like kind of reminder that sometimes when I do go and see shiny things, just get back in your lane. And then the second thing is I have tried to make things work because I'm stubborn and determined and probably quite obtuse, that just needed to have stopped way earlier. And I'm talking about a variety of things here, really. Sometimes like I've kept employees on way longer than I should have done because I kind of want to make it work and I want to train, I want to be understanding or whatever it might be. And actually it's really hard to do. Like, is this person good enough for the role? Yes or no? End of. I hired a few years back a client manager and she lasted about 3 months, if that. And the warning signs were really clear on the wall. And yet I didn't want to acknowledge the warning signs. I didn't want to read the writing on the wall because I was like, no, don't worry, we can make it work. But at what cost? Like all of these things have an opportunity cost or a financial cost attached. Like we lost 3 months, X amount of thousands of pounds in recruitment and hiring and training. That was all for naught, really. And I know that some things that I've done in the past have cost me a lot of time and a lot of money, which has, I suppose, postponed the growth that I could have had earlier. And I think entrepreneurs can really easily discount the opportunity costs for some decisions. Another example, right? We needed to raise our rates at one point, and we've got hundreds of clients, and it was just, oh gosh, are we going to lose? Is it going to be the end of Capital Tuition Group? Is this going to be an absolute disaster? But there was 6 months of kind of deliberating and number crunching and analyzing and talking to mentors and, people with wise counsel and all of that stuff before I made the fundamental decision to increase my rates by a grandiose 11%. This was a couple of years after the pandemic where prices were skyrocketing anyway. And, there was about 6 months of increased revenue of 11% that didn't come as revenue into the business. So I suppose the summary of the second example that I'm giving is that just know what you should be saying no to and cut your losses earlier if you are able to, because it will help you grow. Now, I also acknowledge that it's not everybody's massive objective to grow, but I think most people are in the entrepreneur world for two reasons. One, they absolutely love what they do and they are passionate about the space in which they occupy, the industry that they're in. But also they want to make a bit of dollar. They want to make a bit of cash because, well, everybody has to make a living. We've all got mortgages to pay, and I suppose most people want to retire in some format sooner rather than later. But yeah, so they're the two bits. But I'd love to hear what you would say on that as well. What would you say was your biggest calamity in the businesses that you've grown, Claire?
In terms of the biggest mistakes I've made, I'll give you two. The first one is we didn't get a CFO early enough, or an FD. I wish I had have done that a lot earlier, even though it was expensive. That would have really helped us, especially having a subscription business. It would have helped us figure out how to apportion everything, because it can be quite confusing when you've got a subscription business. The second thing is hiring. What would I do differently? You have to learn the lessons. You have to make all those mistakes. But I made a lot of hiring mistakes. We hired too many people too fast, which really changed the culture kind of overnight. We didn't have the right structures in place to have that many people. So if I was going to do it again, I would hire slower, even though it would slow us down a bit, so that you could tighten those processes as you went on, rather than having loads of people and not the right processes in place. I resonated with having somebody for 3 months and not being able to admit that maybe it wasn't the right fit. And I've done that, Matthew, time and time and time again. And you know what? I think the thing is, in business, it's just about facing yourself. We have these problems where the reason why we have to relearn it is because we get in the way, we're the problem, and we kind of have to face ourselves again and again and again. This is why listening to podcasts is really helpful, talking to other founders, doing some personal development, but very similar, really. Hiring the wrong people, not realizing, not being able to admit that, the pain of going through that realization and then having to fix it. All of this is just the mud that you have to go through in entrepreneurship. Interestingly, I had a business meeting this morning with somebody and we were talking about how hard business is. And I actually had IVF with my first child. And I was thinking, that was a walk in the park in comparison to business. And I know some people find IVF really, really hard. In my mind, I think it's about mindset, isn't it? My mind, it just wasn't difficult in comparison to business. So I think it kind of just sets it in perspective of what a challenge we have set ourselves to change something, change an element of the education world, and also change the trajectory of something that we're building for our families, for our communities as well. Matthew, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'd love to catch up another time. That would be absolutely amazing because I think probably got a few shared experiences that we can relate to each other with. If you had to pick out something that you think we haven't talked about so far on the podcast that is helpful for an education business owner to know, what would it be?
Gosh, your experiences are insane as well. And the fact that you compared creating a business to being harder than the process and the experiences that you had doing IVF, that really shocked me. And well done for being so brave to say it in such a candid way. I think entrepreneurship is hard, and it's certainly not for the faint-hearted. It occupies every waking thought that I have, and it's not escapable. And on the one hand, I think that having your own company and being your own boss and blah, 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 all of that beautiful, wonderful stuff is extremely liberating because you don't have to dance to anybody else's tune. You get to do things on your own terms, and you are in control of so much. And yet it is another set of shackles in its own way, in a different capacity. So yeah, entrepreneurship is hard, and it's not for the faint-hearted by any stretch of the imagination. I think one of the things that we haven't really come across in our conversation today is the three things that come to mind. One is the simplification and systematization of creating a business. All you have to do with creating a business is generate demand and supply your supply, right? That's all there is to do. And I think that as entrepreneurs, we're always ideating and doing the next big thing. And of course, it means that your systems have to catch up. Your systems are adequate, so it breaks easily. We've gotten to a stage now at Capital Tuition Group, and we're getting there as well with Tutor Onboarder, where our systems are in place for the products that we sell. So we've got our products. How do we sell them, and how do we service the product? Because obviously the product is itself a service. So there are so many systems around those things, rather than just, oh, let's just do group classes. Oh, let's just do this. Let's just do that. All of the value added stuff that you bring to your business is because you've curated and evolved and built the systems that support the delivery of whatever your product/service is. That's the first thing that I don't think we've talked about too much. And linked to that, the second thing is every single business, and it's not me who says this, it's Daniel Priestley, but I absolutely love it. Everything is downstream from lead generation. If you haven't got any lead generation, you haven't got a business. And that's very true. The number of times I think we all have as entrepreneurs, someone said, oh yeah, we're really looking for this particular thing. And it's not really within your scope or your remit. But of course, we all just go, yeah, of course we do that. Of course we deliver that. No, I've got a solution for you for that. And then that suddenly piques their interest and all of that. That is a form of lead generation. But what you want to try and do is be able to lead generate for the things that you know that you deliver very, very well. And then linked to that, the third thing I don't think we've talked about really is the kind of social media and marketing, which for me, still 10 years down the line, is a completely dark magic. It's black magic. I've got no idea how it works. And the number of times I've hired and employed marketing and digital consultants and digital marketers and all the rest of it, and they're absolutely incredible at creating me this whiz bang reports of we've got 25,000 impressions, you've got 17,000 likes, and we've got this, that, and the other. I'm like, yo, listen, people, tell me how many more inquiries I've had this month by comparison to last month or by comparison to 6 months ago. And I think for those who have cracked marketing, really, really, really well done. But I think it's an ever shifting and evolving game because of algorithms and the trends of this platform versus that other social media platform or whatever it might be. And if you as an entrepreneur have got that cracked, please call me. I want to know how you've done it. But I think that's that, you know, these are huge, great big pillars in the entrepreneur's journey, which isn't that obvious. Yeah, conversations yet to have and yet to evolve and crack open. But no, I've really enjoyed this series of Q&A and questions because it's really provoked some real thoughts in my mind. And I thank you for the opportunity so much for having me on. It's been absolutely wonderful and I hope it's been useful. So thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Education Business Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Classroom Secrets. To find more resources to grow your business, visit classroomsecrets.co.uk.